Hi, this is Africa Investor Stories, and we're back. We've got a lovely guest here, Carla. She's been in special education for 15 years, so that means she's got a lot of patience, knows how to deal with people. She's been working with teachers and parents and designing school solutions and learning problems for dyslexic people. She's lived in Qatar for a exceptional period of time. She was born in Scotland. She has dual heritage parents, so she's from the same place as me in the Caribbean, but also born in the United Kingdom. Excuse me. Yeah, and she lived in Qatar for 8 years. 8 years, so that's a long time. Well, she's currently doing her own podcast, Wonder and Wellbeing, which is going from strength to strength because I am a follower of hers as well. And I have a personal relationship with Carla, where I've known her for 9 months now. We were on the same London Real podcast, Broadcast Yourself course. We've both started to be podcasters, and we've more or less spoken nearly at least once a week, every week for the whole period, even though we've never actually met each other physically. Carla's a great lady, great personality. She's one of those wise people who doesn't speak until the last and always comes with a valid, educated, sensible, non-emotional point of view when everybody else has been throwing all the toys out the pram and me being one of them, if you know me, you know my personality. So I've been trying to take a leaf out of her book. And actually, for me to do that, I've always sort of been prompting her to speak first, which I'm not sure she's cottoned on to. My antics. So reason we've got Carla here today, because even though Carla hasn't invested directly in Africa, and I say that kind of tongue in cheek because many people complain that the Arab countries are part of Africa. It's only colonialists have divided us up. You know, so some people would argue that, some people argue thing, but what in business as an investor, you need to get your family right. You need to get your family right prior, or especially your immediate family, prior to making a sensible investment. And Carla has those skills. 15 years is a long time. She's done that on the mass of the continent of Africa, we can say, where she's understood the culture, because the cultures in the Middle East is very similar to what I experienced in Kenya and Mombasa, where they're very Islamic, and you have to respect and understand to get by and understand the mindset. So without further ado, welcome, Carla.
Thank you, Simon.
Okay.
That was a great intro.
Thank you. I know your internet is a bit hit and miss at times, so I'll try and keep it short and sweet. Tell me something. What made you want to get into the special education?
I think it started out, I would say, from my own childhood, because I had a lot of issues growing up as a child, coming from quite a difficult and problematic background. And I had some challenges myself at school, but I loved school. And I also just had a lot of awareness as a child of different people struggling with school. And also when I was a teenager, I had my own kids very early. So I had to find an alternative way to keep learning, keep growing, and kind of change careers. Because at first when I left school, I was doing business administration. But I would quickly realize that I didn't want to do that, and it wasn't going to fit around my kids when I had my kids. So I started looking at what I could do based on what I liked, basically. And I went to volunteer in my kids' school when they were very small, just so that I could just do anything except stay at home, because I hate staying at home. And I was good at it. I had a lot of empathy, and I was able to manage the behavior of the worst kids. And so that went from volunteering to being offered a job quite quickly. Within a few months of volunteering at the school, I'd been offered a position. And then I just said, well, why not just train in it? If I'm good at it and I like it, I'll take some courses in it at the same time. And it went from there, really. It's just a kind of combination of all those different factors.
What kind of courses did you take?
In the beginning, I took an NVQ in teaching assistant. I started off with an NVQ level 2. I did like an initial, it was sort of like volunteering, parent volunteers in schools or something. I did that first. And then I saw an advert for doing NVQ in teaching assistant. And when I read the description, I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. So I did that. And then after I finished that, I kind of did like a series of smaller different courses in the community until I went to university. When my kids were a little bit bigger, I went and started off with a foundation degree in academic support. And then after that, I finished that and went to do my bachelor's in education. So I just kind of kept weaving my way around in the best way that I could until I was able to go back to university and study for the degree.
So you went back to university, you got your degree. Is it just a teach as in just a I say just as a teacher, it's not like just, it is a very valuable job, but you got your degree in teaching.
No, I've got two different degrees. I've got a foundation degree in academic support, which is specifically for people who work in support roles in schools. And then I have a bachelor's in education, which is generic. It goes across the whole age group. So you can either work in education as an educator, or you can work in the administration side of education. So it's quite a unique combination of qualifications.
What are the signs? Imagine as a father, I want to start a business, but I notice my kids are playing up. I'm starting to get negative reports from school. What are those signs, and how would you propose a parent would handle that?
The signs of problems with their learning.
Yeah, problems with their learning, behaviour.
Well, they're all different. I mean, the general signs that you would look for is it's like anything to do with kids. If there's a sudden change in the child's behaviour from one extreme to another, and I don't mean that every day changes, because kids do change. Just when you get used to them being a certain way, they go through a new developmental stage and then they're a little bit different. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about radical changes. Like, for example, if you had a kid that was happy to get up and go to school for a long time, then all of a sudden there seems to be a big issue. That would be like a red flag, where you think, oh, well, what's happened? Also, kids that are getting maybe eating problems or sleeping problems or any kind of health issue that can't be explained easily. You know, they might be suffering from anxiety or some kind of mental imbalance or something like that that's being triggered by something that's happening at school. Also, the obvious things as well, if you get a kid that's playing up, really acting up when it's time to get ready for school, or is in school and is misbehaving and getting in a lot of trouble, that's usually an underlying sign of something else going on. And it may not necessarily just be a behavior problem. It could be, I've seen a lot of boys, for example, that are having a serious problem with their learning, but it's been manifesting itself for many years as a behavior issue. And when they've got to us at grade 7 or 8, 11, 12, 13 years old, we've realized that they haven't got a behavior problem at all. What they've got is some kind of reading or writing or learning specific problem, but they've been masking it with bad behavior, either because they were embarrassed and they didn't want people to know that that was their problem, or because nobody was picking up on the fact that they had a learning issue. And that's really common with boys. So those are the kind of typical things to look for, drastic changes in behavior and bad behavior that's out of control. I would say as a first place to look.
That's interesting that you say that, because I was thinking about myself. When I was struggling at school, I just stopped going to school. But prior to that, I would just talk through the lesson. Just entertain myself with other students, regardless if they're trying to study. I'll just be like, eh. And you always hear the girls go, Miss, tell Simon, leave me alone. And all that kind of thing. So yeah, that really rings true. So remedy-wise, obviously every problem is different, but give us some scenarios of how a parent can be involved in helping the child get back on track.
Yeah, again, it depends. But I think the main thing with parents is you've always got to keep the line of communication open between you and the child. the more kids feel that they can talk to their parents, the better it's going to be, whatever. It doesn't matter how bad it is. If they can talk to their parents, and if their parents can listen and have communication with them that stays calm, that's the hardest thing. You've got to be able to stay calm and kind of, sometimes you have to take your emotion out of the situation and deal with it as if it wasn't even your child, like in a very practical way. That would be the first thing. But also, I think if that's difficult, which it can be for parents, especially when you've been struggling with a child for a long time and maybe struggling on your own, I would say get somebody who has got that pragmatic or practical way of dealing with situations to help you out. And that could be a family member or even just a professional that's outside and completely independent, so that you can have the conversation that you need to have with the child to maybe find out what it is that's going on. I think once kids reach to the ages of 5, 6, 7, they're able to communicate on a level, even with an adult, as long as you've got a language that they can access, you know, and you speak to them in a very direct way, they can tell you exactly what's going on. So talking to them and finding out how they're feeling, why they're doing what they're doing, really is going to be your first step with everything. After that, I'd say observation as well. To really find out what's going on with a kid, you need to spend some time being objective and observing what's going on, which is what we do in education or we do in intervention. We spend a long time just staying away from the child and observing them in real situations, and making notes and things like that, so that we can build up a picture of what's really going on before or even after we speak to the child. You know, so those two things, I think communication and observation are two critical factors in dealing with any issue.
I see. As a teacher, do you find it, you said it comes naturally the way you communicate with the children. Is there any special things that you do that we could take home, that how you communicate?
Yeah, I have a very calm approach. That's partly my personality. I just don't see the point in getting flappy. I'm not very good at doing it, actually. I do have times where I kind of lose my calm in it, but I don't really achieve what I'm trying to achieve when that happens, and I just kind of confuse myself. But I think staying calm is like my tool that helped me through the years. And also just being able to communicate with different types of people on a level they understand. I have like multiple languages. I listen to people and I see what kind of level they are on in terms of how they like to communicate and things like that. And then I just try and match them so that I can get to the goal. And that's what I do with kids. So 6-year-old kids communicate different from 10-year-olds. You know, 7-year-old girls have a completely different style from, you know, a 13-year-old boy. And it's not just gender, it's personality as well. You know, hyperactive or busy kids communicate in a different way from introverted, you know, more scientifically minded kids. So you kind of have to know how to match them and come to their level and speak to them in a way that they understand. And I think those things are what I've developed, you know, from experience over the years as well.
Okay, so tell us about your podcast, Wonder and Wellbeing. What's that all about? Just give us some insight. How you came to choose a name, why you do it, what motivates you.
Yeah, the podcast came about when I was kind of getting to the end of my career in the full-time teaching in the classroom. And I was kind of like burning out. I can feel that my energy levels weren't the same. You know, I was kind of getting tired all the time and just finding it a bit stressful. And it was affecting me physically, like just my health and everything, because I was trying to juggle that with everything else. And I had to go through a period where I had to kind of figure out how to keep a balance between work and home and health and well-being. And I had to come up with all these different strategies. And then I realized how difficult it was. And speaking to other parents and teachers and people like that, I realized that everyone kind of faces the same issue. So I wanted to come up with a way that I could help, that I could kind of transition out of full-time teaching because it was that time for me, but also building something that I could use to help other parents and teachers along the way. And so the podcast was kind of the idea that spiraled off some of the stuff that I was doing with parents, kind of like on a flexible basis. And it grew from there. I wanted it to be about providing solutions to parents and teachers so that they could get some ideas or just join a conversation in a community of people talking about how to balance kids' education with their own well-being, which is, it's like a tightrope sometimes. How do you do that? People always try and put kids first, but actually you can't really truly sustain taking care of kids unless you're taking care of yourself. So that's really what it's all about.
So you need that self-maintenance as well for yourself, which is your own time, whether with a loved one or what have you, so you can be fully charged to look after your children in that respect. And this is why, to the audience, this is why Carla's here, because she's more than an expert in that industry. They say if you do something over 10,000 hours, then you're a professional expert, OBE standard. And Carla's been doing it for 15 years. And that's a lot of hours in each day. So, you know, we're talking to a guru. So I would actually say people should listen to her podcast, because if you notice what Carla said, Carla spoke about the fact that there's a balance, and it's a work life, investor life, family life balance. What are the common issues for parents that you finding that work-life balance?
I think one of the biggest issues is finances. Parents really struggle. Kids are expensive. That's a fact of life, and life is expensive nowadays. And I think that a lot of parents find themselves just overwhelmed and in over their head when it comes to the number of hours that they have to do. And the more hours you have to work, the less time you have for your own kids. So that for parents is a big issue. It's how do you make enough money to support your kids and to give them the things that they're supposed to need, that everyone tells you they need to be successful and to, you know, have a good future and all of that, but spend time with them and take care of yourself. That's the biggest issue for parents, and it's ongoing. It doesn't change from one generation to the next. It's the same story, you know?
Okay, yeah. So what does the future hold for Carla? You're doing your podcast. You know, just come back from Qatar not too long ago. What's the future?
Well, at the moment, I'm kind of building the business, building up clients and working with people on a freelance basis, so that I can homeschool my own son, because that's what my balance was all about over the years. It was figuring out how to take care of him and work and all of that. So I'm doing that. And I've decided to kind of specialize. I decided a few years ago, that's where the podcast came from, but to specialize in the area of education and well-being, because there's just not a lot of people out there talking about that or doing that. And if they are, they're doing it from the point of view of the formal education system rather than the community-based thing. So I'm building up that and working towards that. And I went back to school as well. So I'm studying for my master's degree in well-being and creative writing, because my work revolved around literacy. Most of it was about literacy problems and helping kids with problems related to reading and writing. So over the years, I kind of developed that as my passion, just from my work. And I think that it's very important that kids read and write. Even today, with all the technology, kids still need to be able to read and write, because it's just a key skill for a human being. So that's what I'm working on, and also figuring out how to build community projects for parents so that they can use, and teachers, so they can use things like creative writing to enhance their own well-being and also the well-being of kids. So that's where I'm at the moment. In the near future, that's the next year, but any further ahead than that, it's whatever the people need, I guess, what clients and customers and, you know, people come forward and request. That's where it's going.
Looking at the Carla now and looking at the Carla when you started, what would you tell the Carla when you started, knowing what you know now? What vital thing would you tell her? Hello? I think I've lost you.
It's the same one.
Hello?
Yeah, I would say be yourself.
Be yourself. Okay. You know, you froze for a moment there. I just saw. So you're saying just be yourself.
Yeah, I think we waste a lot of time in life just kind of questioning who we are and whether or not we're good enough as we are, and should we be someone else to be accepted. And I think the time that's wasted is precious doing that. So, and that's something I've been aware of in my life, is just that challenge of, no, I'm good as I am, and I'll just be this person and just keep going on this course.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's what I would say to myself from a few years ago.
What was the biggest trial you had when you moved to Qatar and you're starting to deal with, obviously, I assume it's an international school you're teaching at?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're dealing with the local culture, the Islamic culture or the Muslim culture, and then you're dealing with everybody else. What was the biggest trial?
I think the biggest trial was just kind of like being open to just knowing nothing. I think that it's knowing stuff and being knowledgeable and experienced and all of that is a bit overrated, because there are some situations where it's irrelevant. No one really cares what you know or where you come from. And I think that the faster you get that when you go to a new place, the better, because you can just start afresh. You can make a clean slate and you can just be the person who doesn't know and be open to learning. And that was a challenge that I faced in the beginning, especially coming from a Western country where we are so trained and we're so skilled and knowledgeable. And you think that you have all the strategies and the books and the experts, but then you go somewhere where nothing works the way it works where you came from. And so all the stuff that you've accumulated over the years is irrelevant, you know. So you've still got to spend that time observing and kind of immersing yourself in the new culture and how things really work in that setting before you can even start to be effective. And I remember doing stuff like preparing lessons and preparing materials and things before I went to the job, thinking that I was going to look professional, but when I got there, it was none of it was going to work. So I had to throw it all out, and spend a long time just observing what was really happening, and start all over again, basically. So that was a huge learning curve for me.
That's interesting you say that, because it's the same thing I experienced when I moved to Africa, is that I need to be comfortable not knowing anything and just observe how they do things, why they do things. And I say Africa, obviously I was based mainly in Kenya, but I traveled throughout Africa, the east, south and north, and just looking and seeing, you know, they sometimes they take what we do in the West, but they do it like spin it totally on its head, and you're like, no, you're not meant to do it like that. No, no, no. But they look at you like, what's wrong? This is how we do it. This is what works for us. And you're like, no, no, no. But at the end of the day, you gotta be open-minded. It's just like going back to the kids. You've got to be open-minded. You've got to look at them, understand them, learn how to work with them, and it's a real valuable thing. It's something you can implement with your children, with your wife, your partner, and because it's also understanding that intimate network. You know, just because you're married to someone, you still got to understand them. They're changing all the time, and it's really good what you're saying. I really, really like what you're saying, and on that line of things. What was it like teaching in the Qatar, dealing with the Islamic culture? I asked you this is because obviously Africa in general is either Islamic, Christian, or you got some tribal beliefs, especially that in Kenya. A third of Kenya is actual traditional African beliefs that was before any kind of colonialist got there. That's what they're dealing with, which is, I think it's a great thing. But what was it like for you?
It was a really good experience. And again, it was the same thing. It was about having that open mind and not assuming that what you were used to is right necessarily. I think that's where we go wrong. It's like, oh, okay, our culture is right, or our culture or our way of doing things is better. Rather than seeing it like that, what I did was I just saw it as a learning experience. And so it was fascinating. That's the word that I would use to describe it in the beginning. It was just fascinating to see how so many things just work the opposite way there to how they worked in the Western world. And just being able to observe that and just kind of, I'm quite an analytical person and quite a critical thinker. So I'm able to kind of look at the pros and cons of any situation and I'm very rarely biased in something. So it was a great learning experience of just kind of honing those skills of critical thinking and saying, well, yeah, the Western culture has this in terms of things like freedom. You know, they use words like freedom, we're more free, and over there they're oppressed, kind of thing. But you're able to kind of to look at it objectively and say, well, actually, you know, we have this level of freedom in the West, in the sense that you can be free after 18 years old to walk in any supermarket in the West and buy alcohol. But when you go to a bar with that and you look at that and think, well, I wonder why they've done that, or I wonder what are the benefits to that in this culture? And then you see things like, as a parent, you never have to protect your child from a drunken person that's walking along the street, for example. Or you don't have to talk to your kids about people being drunk in the park after a certain time. So there are advantages and disadvantages, you know, and I was able to see that very clearly from observation. But also in terms of things like the family, one of the nicest things about going to the Middle East, and especially in Qatar, was that the family is a big thing. You know, it's not really heard of to find, for example, a young single woman raising kids all by herself, literally alone, with no support, no grandmother, no aunts. It's just not a part of the culture on a level that it is in the West. And that whole family structure is really it's really fiercely protected there. And sometimes it's protected to an extreme where people lose their individual freedoms. But that's the part that's always emphasized outside, you know, oh, they don't have any individual freedom, but actually they have a lot of other freedoms that we don't have. One of them being the freedom to kind of develop themselves as an individual with a support system around them. And I think that's one of the things that I found really beautiful about the culture there. And that stuck with me, I kind of, when I left, and just the way that women are not as vulnerable and as exposed to objectification. And this, I'm talking from my experience in Qatar, not from the whole Middle East, you know, because I know all the countries have a different culture, but Qatar is the women are very protected, usually by their family. And that has a lot of positive benefits for women. They're not as exposed as they are in, say, Western countries, where you kind of have to get out there and roll in the dirt with the boys and just like kind of compete with them and things like that. It isn't like that there. A woman is a woman, and that means a certain thing. And I know not everyone agrees with that, but I found that to be quite interesting and a nice experience to see.
I found it humbling. I was in Abu Dhabi, and I think it's even when I was in Dubai, and the women just automatically get taken to the front of the queue. They also have their own queue. They can, like on the carriage trains as well, they can join with men, but they can also go in their own section. And I think that's really respectful, and it avoids lots of issues, you know, that are in the natural world and sadly will never go away. But you can, prevention is better than cure in that sense. You've got three children. You're a great mum. What I was going to ask you now, convincing them that moving from Scotland to Qatar, how easy was that? Because obviously that's an investment you're making there, and it's an investment for them because they're being exposed to different ways of living and probably a better living standard in certain respects. How was that for you? How was that process?
Well, my son was a baby at the time, so he wasn't really aware of it, but my daughters were in their early teens. So for them, I had to have a lot of conversations with them about why we were making the move and what the pros and cons were of it, what the realities of the situation were going to be as we knew it at that time. There were a lot of things that came later that we didn't really know, which is what happens with any change. But it was all about just talking to them about the benefits. And I remember the conversation revolving mainly around the benefits of being exposed to another culture and how important that was in the world going forward. And they didn't really understand it at the time. They were a bit skeptical. But they got on board, and my daughters are quite open-minded. They always have been, and they've been used to me being, I think because I had them when I was so young, I've always been learning and exploring. So I kind of went through my exploring who I was and what I wanted in life with kids in tow, whereas a lot of people do it before they have kids. So my daughters, by that age, they'd been used to it. Oh, mum's learning a new thing, or mum's doing a new course, or mum's got a different job, or, you know, so they were fine. They were fine. They had some challenges when they got there, especially with the schooling system, but they were okay. You know, they didn't really have many issues, and it didn't take much. I didn't really have to fight with them to convince them or anything like that, even though they were teenage girls.
So they settled into the school smoothly?
They did, but the problem with them was the schooling system can be quite competitive there because most of the schools are private. The government-run schools are all all the teaching's done in Arabic. So when you're arriving in as a teenager with no Arabic, you're not able to go to that school. So they went to international schools, but just the timing of the move meant that it was halfway through an academic year. So there weren't that many places, no, halfway through the first term of an academic year, sorry. So there weren't that many places available in the school at that point. And actually we found out when we got there, they got there around October, November time, and you needed to secure your school place from April, which meant that they were months out of this, you know, the schedule. And so I had to put them in an American school, having moved from the British system to an American school, because it's against the law to have kids there, not in some kind of schooling. And so I had no options, and I just had to put them in a school that was available, and they were fine. They adjusted socially and all of that kind of stuff. But when they got to grade 10, they got out of depth when it came to mathematics and physics, because they just hadn't studied maths and physics in the American system before, and they were just way behind. And that caused a few issues with them when they got to high school. And I ended up having to pull them out of school and let them study at home for the IGCSEs. So they both went back and did their IGCSEs, but they had to do it flexibly. So that was the biggest challenge that I faced with them. Otherwise, everything was, you know, pretty much
so
normal.
you managed to get them up to speed on the physics and the other subject?
No, I just gave them the option of retaking the year, which is what the school had given them, or just come out of school and figure your own way out as you go. You can enroll on courses online, you can do your IGCSEs through the British Council, and we talked about the different options of what they could do and how they could kind of find an alternative route back to where they wanted to be. With one of my daughters, the first one, it was the same pattern with both of them. They were fine in everything, and then in maths and physics, they failed in grade 10. And my eldest daughter, she straight away, she wanted to come out of school. The younger one, she was more social, so I had to really explain to her. And in the end, I had to make the decision on her behalf, because she didn't understand that going back to school and trying to retake the year, nothing was going to change in terms of her and the teachers and the school and the curriculum. And once I explained that to her, then she could kind of see where I was coming from. But that was a bit tricky, because she's a bit more emotional, and she felt like I was pulling her away from her friends. So it was one of those moments where you kind of had to just put your foot down for the child based on what is the really important thing, rather than what they think is important, you know, because the friendships weren't great anyway. It was causing her a lot of stress, but she just couldn't see that. So it was there were a few difficult years with my daughters because of that, but yeah, we managed to get through it.
Last but not least, what's the impact Carla wants to have on the world?
Well, I want everybody to be involved in the conversation around children and children's education and well-being. And I mean everybody, all those people out there that don't have kids, the people out there that are big business owners that think that kids have nothing to do with their business. Everybody should be involved in the conversation. And in the community and in the network, sharing resources and ideas that's going to improve the well-being of kids by improving the well-being of the people who take care of them, which is their parents and their teachers. So if that happens, then I'll be pleased.
Okay. And where can people find you?
Well, the best place is to jump on the website, www.wonderandwellbeing.com. And all my links are there, so they can go and listen to the podcast from the website, and also connect with me on social media and drop me a message or anything there. It's just a kind of a one-stop, and everything's there.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. And you heard it on Africa Investor Stories. Truly invest in your family and your business will go forth. Thanks a lot.